I am still really excited about that Remington 1903A3, but I've got to get back on these Winchesters. And that's what we're going to do today. Now, we've had some pretty bad weather, so I hadn't exactly been able to get to the range. But that's probably a good thing, because all of this weather is forcing me to slow down and go back and giving me a chance to work on my fundamentals. So today, that's what I'm working on. And what I'm going to do is work on the setup on this Winchester Model 70 Westerner. Then I'm going to work on my setup as far as at the bench. And once I get those two things done, then I'm going to work on my shooting fundamentals at the bench, at this bench. And what I'm going to do is work on dry firing. And the great thing about dry firing, you can do it in your house. You don't need to be at the range, and you don't have to use ammo. And both of those things are pretty valuable right now, given the ammo shortages, all the bad weather, and so forth. So I thought this might be something that, quite a few of y'all are interested in right now. For those of you that haven't been following along, I wanted to do a comparison between this relatively new 2013 Winchester Model 70 Westerner and the Winchester Model 70 Featherweight, this one made in 1960. I wanted to, really see the difference between the rifles, not just, all the things I've heard over the years. I wanted to put them side by side, and that's what we're working on. But I started out with identical scopes, rings, and bases on both rifles. But then I ran into a problem on this 1960 Featherweight. And the problem wasn't the rifle, it was the bases. The two-piece bases I used, they were off-center. All right, so when I mounted the scope, that caused the scope to be off-center, and I didn't have enough travel in the scope to get the crosshairs on the target. All right, we'll just say that was a problem. And what I did, I haven't been happy with those bases for a while. I've had a couple of issues recently, and yeah, it's time to try something different. So what I did was I put these Warren Maxima bases on the Featherweight, and I have just been ecstatic with those. These have two slots in the front base, and what that does is it gives me more options as far as mounting the scope, or the rings rather. So I can put this front ring further back, which lets me get the scope further back. Hey, that's a big plus. Now on the bases I have now, I could have turned this base 180 degrees, and that would have got this ring further back. And hey, that would have worked, with this setup. Except for this base was also off-center, and I could not zero my scope with it turned 180 degrees like I had it originally. So I had to flip it 180. Then I could zero the scope and get it on target. And I'm just mentioning that in case you ever run into problems one day. You don't have enough travel in your scope because of the base. You might want to try flipping one or both or whatever. That can get you on target. But again, I haven't been happy with these bases. All right, so I'm going to put the same Warren Maxima bases on this rifle. And the other great thing about these bases that I didn't realize is they're lower profile. So that got my scope down just a little bit, gave me a little bit better cheek weld. And at the range, I can't begin to describe how much better this 1960 Featherweight felt than this Westerner. But it wasn't because of how the rifles were made. It was the bases made that much of a difference. So let's start by getting this changed over. I complained a little bit before about not being happy with the slotted screws that came with these bases I have on here now, and it wasn't that I was really that unhappy with the slotted screws. I mean, they work, I've used them forever. I was unhappy with having to change them and undo them and swap around things so often. And these screw heads, they're a little wide from a tip, and they're starting to look a little rough. So I definitely prefer the torque screws. But I mean, these were working. It's just, I just really got annoyed with all the swapping. Especially with doing so much of that swapping on the bench at the range. That's never fun when you're at the range and swapping things around. That looks better. Let me give y'all a quick shot of these new bases. Here's the new bases, and this is the old front base right here. Notice the single slot versus two. And again, this one's just so much lower profile than the old one. So this is really going to help me out. And remember, when you're locking your rings down, slide them forward, because the rifle is going to want to recoil backwards. And that means the rings are going to want to go forward until they hit a solid stop. Well, you've got a little play back and forth there. If you go ahead and just slide them forward, you're putting them against the stop, and everything's going to settle in a lot quicker. Much better. On my bench setup, I have really enjoyed this Caldwell rock for my front rest. It has worked out great. It's adjustable, it's stable, and just makes life easy. I haven't been so happy with my rear bag, and I've tried different things as far as height. It was taking me a while to really get dialed in. I know about what I need now, and I've been wanting to get me a good leather rear bag. But I needed to know what size I needed before I ordered it, because you don't want to order the wrong one. And this rear bag right now, we're about 2.5 inches on it. So if I go with a 3.5 inch bag, that's going to be about perfect. I mean, my bench setup should be about as good as it gets then. So I'll go ahead and get that ordered, and then, like I said, bench setup, we'll be good to go. And then combine that with the changes with these bases, and that did make a world of difference getting the scope back and down. All right, so it's just a more comfortable setup, and it's going to be a more repetitive setup. Now with all that out of the way, we can start talking shooting fundamentals, or at least the stuff I'm working on. All right, and I learned the finer points in high school from a retired Army Master Sergeant. I grew up shooting, and truthfully, I don't ever remember not shooting. My earliest memories, I can remember having a pellet gun or BB gun or something. But in high school, that's where I learned the finer points, and that's what I always go back to when I start working on my fundamentals. All right, squeezing the trigger. I want it to be a surprise when the trigger breaks. I don't want to anticipate the shot. Breathing. I want to squeeze the trigger after I exhale, because there's a natural pause when you exhale. You breathe in, you automatically breathe out, and then you naturally pause for a second. All right, that's when you want to shoot. And it just keeps everything a little more stable. And as far as shooting positions, that's something else I need to work on, but that's just easier for me to work on inside the house. as far as going back to sitting, kneeling, standing, prone. It's a little more difficult out here in the sitting position here in the shop. But for now, I'm just going to practice at the bench because that's what I'm going to be doing at the range. And that's where I want, to really be on top of things as far as my load testing. I want to make sure I'm not doing anything to throw off my shots. All right, so I'm going to start dry firing this rifle. And there's so much out there on dry firing rifles. I'm just going to say, go look up your gun. Just bottom line. Most centerfire rifles, it's not a problem, it's not an issue, and you do not need snap caps. Okay, with that said, there is a safety thing with dry firing though. Okay, just like in any other time, with dry firing, you want to think about where you're pointing the firearm. All right, let's say I accidentally just, I had brain fog and I just forgot and I chambered a cartridge in here. It's possible. I mean, seriously, it can happen. All right, so even with dry firing, even if there's a wall there, obviously I do not want to shoot a hole in my wall. What's the other side of that wall? All right, are you firing at a wall that, you got a neighbor's house just, no distance away? Well, that wouldn't be very good, now would it? So you want to think about, if you did make that mistake and a bullet went off, what's it going to hit? As long as you're pointing in a safe direction, it's going to scare you to death, I imagine. But it's not going to hurt anybody. And that's what we're worried about, is making sure we're safe and nobody gets hurt. And I've said this many times before, but firearms are just like learning to drive a car. And this is something most of us can relate to, especially on the cars. When you're first learning to drive a car, you're nervous and you're paying attention to every little detail. And then the moment you think, oh, I got this, that's when you have a wreck. It's kind of the same way with firearms. The moment you become relaxed and think, okay, I got this, that's when you have an accident. Or that's when you do something that you realize afterwards, that could have been an accident. That could have been serious. All right. And a little story I just want to share with y'all, just to show you how easily things happen. A friend of mine, he told me this story about him years ago. He had a brand new .45 automatic, and he was dry firing. He was at a friend's house, and they were just talking guns, and he had his new gun out, and he's just dry firing, just one after another, not thinking, and they're talking, and then just without thinking, he just put the magazine in it, and bam. All right, luckily, nobody got hurt. It scared him to death, and it was, we'll just say it was a dangerous situation, especially given they were in an apartment complex. And he didn't exactly, he wasn't happy having to go to explain to the neighbors why they had a bullet hole in their wall. Let's put it that way. All right, so it happens that easy. So just because, we're creatures of habit, we're all human, we all make mistakes. Anything you do, try to have multiple backups to it so that if you do forget and do something dumb, you've got another backup to make sure nothing bad happens. All right, so, obviously you're going to clear your rifle, and this one's cleared. It was cleared before I even came out here. But let's say you have that one bad day and you do something stupid and you always clear it, but that one day, for whatever reason, you didn't. All right, you need a backup. All right, well, that's where practicing in the same spot every time, so that if you did make a mistake, if you're in that position against that wall with nobody, behind the house or wherever, beside the house, on a particular side that might be safe, just wherever, just make sure you're always going to a spot that's safe for you to do that. And if a cartridge did go off, no one's going to get hurt. We're safe here. If a cartridge went off right now, it's going out the front of my shot and it's going to hit the ground. So, now, with that said, I want to settle down here and I'll do this again when I get my new bag. I'm going to make sure everything's right. But I just want to settle down here and I want to slowly build up pressure on this trigger until this rifle goes off. And I don't want to anticipate the shot. And just to make this challenging, I heard a tip one time, and I don't know if this tip means anything. I don't know if it amounts to a hill of beans. But you want to keep practicing until you can dry fire a rifle looking through a scope on a target, and the crosshairs never move when the firing pin goes off. Because there's a lot of tension on the firing pin. You'll be amazed at how much your rifle jumps just from the firing pin when you're dry firing. And if you're really locked down on a target, you're really concentrating, you'll see it jump. And again, I don't know if you ever get to the point it doesn't. I don't even know if it matters. But what I do know is it keeps you focused. And it gives you something to focus on. And that's going to help you with your follow through. That's going to help you just, it keeps you down in the rifle and paying attention. And that's the main thing, is you're paying attention. So let's see what I can do with this one. Didn't move. This time. Next time, who knows? But anyway, I just thought that was something interesting, and you'll see it'll be more pronounced, you know, when you've got a target at a distance. You'll see that bump in it and so forth. Like I said, it just keeps you focused. But I'm going to stay out here and I'm going to continue working on this. And the only thing I'd really say is just pay attention. Don't just, you know, just start, you know, chambering, you know, racking the bolt and just pulling the trigger. Really stay focused on every little detail. Work on your position, building your positions. And this is something that I had forgotten until I read somebody's comments, and it reminded me of this. The retired master sergeant that taught me to shoot, I was on the rifle team in high school. During practice, if we missed the black part of the bullseye, we had to do 20 push-ups. All right, which, you know, that 20 push-ups for a teenager, that's nothing. If you get in there on a bad day, though, those push-ups could pile up real quick. It kept you focused. Just thinking about that. All right, well, I said before that we need to focus on making our first shot count and every shot count. That's real easy to get in that habit now, just going to the range and blasting away and not worrying about making that first shot count. Well, it's the same way with dry firing. You want to work on every little detail as you're doing it. You're not there just to squeeze the trigger and hear the gun go click. You want to focus on your setup. You want to focus on your trigger squeeze. You want to focus on everything. And that's what I'm fixing to spend at least another good 15, 20, 30 minutes doing. And I'm going to start doing this pretty regularly because I was very disappointed in my setup at the range when I was load testing. You know, I made some good shots, but I made a lot of bad shots. And this is something I hadn't thought about in a long time, but in hunting, you know, we got hunting, we got firearms. Or we got hunting, self-defense, whatever you're doing, target, shooting, competition, whatever. And we got firearms. We get so focused on making sure our rifles are perfect and that we're shooting those perfect tiny little groups and so forth. But what really hurts us is those occasional bad shots. In other words, you can be a mediocre shot as far as just accuracy on target. As long as you're hitting the target, you've done what you need to do, period. You know, it doesn't really matter if your bullets are all going in a 1-inch circle or a 1/2-inch circle. I mean, seriously, it doesn't matter at that point. But if you have some bad habits and you make that occasional really bad shot, you know, those flyers that just come from nowhere, that hurts you, whether it's hunting, competition, self-defense. All right, so anyway, I just thought that's interesting, and that's just one more reason to really pay attention to each and every shot and to stay focused on all those details and to work out those bad habits, which is what I'm fixing to start doing. And when we do get back to the range, I think what I'm going to do, I thought about this a good bit. I was just going to verify the loads from last time for the 270s, the ones I talked about, the shot crate and so forth. I think what I'm going to do is verify all of them again, though. I'm curious. I want to see just the change in my setup and me practicing. I want to see how much of a difference that makes across the board. So I want the loads that shot really good for me, I want to see, of course, do they shoot great again and verify those. But do the groups that were really bad, do those suddenly get a lot better? Anyway, I'm just curious. So that's what we're going to work on. I just can't tell you when with the weather we've been getting. So sometime here in the near future, that's what we're going to try. All right. And one other thing. I really messed up when I was talking about the shot groups from the 270s, and I just wanted to correct this. I said in the video, when you start getting shot groups and straight lines, that straight lines don't occur in nature, so that's not random deviation. And that part's 100% true. Straight lines, they don't occur in nature. All right. But then I said that that's a good indication that the shooter's doing something wrong, and actually it's not. Straight lines in your shot groups, that's a good indication that you do have something wrong with your equipment, not the shooter. All right, if you're not doing your part as the shooter and you're inconsistent, you're just going to have random shots everywhere. You're going to have flyers everywhere. If you see straight lines, up, down, vertical, or whatever, that's generally an equipment thing. And in my case, it might have been where my sling studs were hitting the front rest last time because I had inconsistent, location there. It could have been any number of things. Just in general, the first thing you want to check if you start seeing vertical or horizontal stringing, you want to check your barrel and make sure your stock's not hitting your barrel, because that's just absolute classic. Your barrel heats up, and as it heats up, if it's touching the stock on the left side, as the barrel heats up, your shots will go to the right in a straight line. Or if it's touching on the other side, they'll go to the left in a straight line. If it's touching on the bottom, they'll go up in a straight line. Or if you've got huge variations in your charges on your cartridges, you're going to get vertical stringing from the different velocities. Although that's generally not a problem until unless you've got some huge variations in velocity. That's generally not an issue till you start getting out, extreme long ranges. But I did want to throw that out there because, I blew it when I said that. I just knew I had made a lot of mistakes that day. So I was pointing out, I had messed up a lot of it. So anyway, I wanted to clear that up. I'm fixing to start doing some dry firing now, and hopefully this gives a lot of y'all that are struggling with not being able to get out to the range due to the weather, ammo shortage, whatever. Hopefully just some stuff you can work on also. God bless and have a good day.